What if I told you that the most powerful weapon in modern history doesn't fire bullets, doesn't roll on tank treads, and doesn't explode on impact? What if the real weapon is silent, invisible, and embedded into every national economy on Earth? A weapon so effective that entire nations can be conquered without ever realizing they were under attack. A weapon capable of shaping wars, toppling governments, rewriting cultures, and deciding which societies rise and which collapse. This weapon is money, but not money the way you think of it. Not the notes in your wallet or the digits in your bank app. I'm talking about engineered money, designed money, weaponized money, the kind that governments quietly build, and the kind they eventually lose control of. Today's story is about how money stopped being a tool of trade and became an instrument of power, and how nations across the world failed to see the transformation happening right in front of them. It's a story of hidden motives, secret meetings, global agreements, and financial decisions that look harmless on paper yet shape the destiny of billions of people. And the strangest part, there was no single moment when money officially became a weapon. It happened gradually, silently, expertly, and by the time the world realized what had changed, it was already too late. This is the story of how it began. To understand how money turned into a weapon, we have to rewind centuries back to a world long before digital banks, central planners, or global lending institutions existed. There was a time when money was real, a weight, a metal, a scarcity. Gold and silver didn't care about politics. They didn't obey kings. You couldn't print them, you couldn't decree them, and you certainly couldn't conjure them out of thin air. But this old system had a problem. Real money limits power. You can't build an empire on a currency you can't control. So early rulers experimented with ways to stretch this power. They shaved coins, mixed metals, and declared new values by decree. But these tricks were small compared to what would come later. The first real shift happened in the 1600s, when the Bank of England pioneered a concept that would change everything. Money could be created from promises. A paper note wasn't a coin, it was a claim backed, supposedly, by gold stored somewhere else. At first, the system was simple. If a bank had 100 gold coins, it might issue 100 paper notes. But soon banks realized something dangerous. People rarely showed up all at once to redeem their notes, so the banks asked a question that would echo for centuries. What if we issued more notes than the gold we actually have? It sounds harmless, logical, even. But that single question, that one idea, created a world where money and reality no longer had to match. And when money detached from reality, it became something new, a tool, a method, a lever of control. The first hint of weaponization had appeared. As governments watched banks create money from promises, a realization spread. Whoever controls the creation of money, controls everything built with it. By the early 20th century, nearly every major nation had formed a central bank. These institutions were sold to the public as stabilizers, protectors against crisis. But their real power lay in something else. They could expand or shrink a nation's money supply with a single decision. And once this power existed, it was used. World War I, the first large-scale experiment. When World War I erupted, countries discovered a brutal truth. Gold-backed currencies couldn't pay for trench networks, artillery factories, and millions of soldiers. So governments suspended gold convertibility. Centrally controlled paper money became the norm. The war didn't just reshape Europe's borders, it reshaped the meaning of money itself. Nations printed enormous sums to fund the conflict, weaponizing inflation against their own citizens without ever admitting it. The public saw cheap bread turn expensive, but they never saw the invisible mechanism behind it. Money had finally become a geopolitical tool. The interwar chaos after the war. Countries struggled to return to gold, but the currency systems were now too corrupted to restore the old balance. Germany tried. They failed. Hyperinflation swallowed the country whole, giving the world one of the most extreme examples of monetary collapse in history. But many forget the deeper lesson. Hyperinflation wasn't an accident, it was a consequence, a predictable result of using money as a financing weapon. The Federal Reserve expands power across the Atlantic. The United States made its own crucial shift. In 1933, under President Roosevelt, the link between citizens and gold was cut. Americans could no longer exchange dollars for gold. The government had severed the final anchor tying money to physical value. This wasn't framed as a power grab, it was framed as saving the economy. But in reality, it marked the moment when money became whatever the government said it was, backed not by metal, but by decree. Debt-based currency had fully arrived. The year that transformed global finance forever wasn't 2008. It wasn't 2020. It wasn't even during the Great Depression, it was 1971. This was the moment when money truly died, and became something else entirely. The Bretton Woods system. After World War II, world leaders met in a secluded hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was simple: prevent future global financial chaos. The solution: create a new world order where all currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar itself would be pegged to gold. This system worked for a while, but it had a fatal flaw. The US was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. Countries began noticing. France in particular called the bluff and demanded physical gold in exchange for dollars. If other nations followed, the US would lose its gold reserves. And so President Nixon made a decision no one expected. He severed the dollar from gold entirely. August 15, 1971, the quiet financial revolution. In a televised announcement that seemed almost routine, Nixon declared that the United States would temporarily suspend the gold standard. Temporary, of course, became permanent. From this moment forward, money no longer needed to be backed by anything. Governments could print infinitely. Debt became the foundation of the global economy, and currency became pure belief. This was the true moment money turned into a weapon of influence, a weapon of control, a weapon of global domination. And most nations didn't realize what had happened until decades later. Once money was free from limits, governments and financial institutions shaped entire economies using levers no one could see. The debt explosion in 1971, global debt was around $2 trillion. Today, it is over $300 trillion. This number is not an accident. It is the mathematical result of a global system where money is created through lending, not productivity. If the world stops borrowing, the world stops functioning. Interest rates as weapons. By raising or lowering interest rates, central banks discovered they could trigger recessions, inflate asset bubbles, crash housing markets, make entire classes richer or poorer, influence elections, control national behavior. No army in history ever had this level of silent influence. Currency wars begin. Countries engaged in deliberate currency devaluation to cheapen exports and gain an edge in global trade. These silent conflicts reshaped industries without firing a single shot. Japan in the 1980s, China in the 2000s, Europe during the Euro crisis, all examples of weaponized currency in action. The IMF and World Bank era for struggling nations. International loans became lifelines, but with strings attached. Austerity, privatization, structural adjustments. These programs often hollowed out economies, transferring wealth and resources to outside interests while leaving nations deeper in debt. Money wasn't just a weapon, it became a leash. Governments attempted multiple fixes to regain financial control, but each one backfired. 1. Quantitative easing QE. After the 2008 crisis, central banks printed trillions in new money to save financial markets. But the new money didn't go to citizens, it went to banks, corporations, and financial institutions. Result: the richest 1% got massively richer assets, inflated wages, stagnated. Inequality hit historic highs. The weapon had been fired again, this time at the middle class. 2. Zero and negative interest rates. When economies slowed, central banks dropped rates to near zero and even below zero. This forced nations to borrow endlessly just to stay afloat. 3. Digital money and surveillance finance. As physical money faded, digital currencies enabled unprecedented monitoring and control. Spending could be tracked. Accounts could be frozen. Transactions could be restricted. Money evolved from a weapon into something even more dangerous, a control mechanism intertwined with identity. If you think weaponized money is a thing of the past, look at the modern world. Sanctions as financial warfare today. Nations don't need to invade. They simply cut a country off from global banking systems. With a few signatures, an entire economy can be shut down. Inflation as a silent tax. In the last few years alone, inflation destroyed trillions in global purchasing power. Citizens thought prices were rising naturally, but behind the scenes, it was the direct consequence of monetary interventions. The global debt trap. Most countries now owe more than their yearly GDP, not because they mismanaged spending, but because the system requires debt to survive. Digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are being developed worldwide. Their supporters claim they boost efficiency, but critics warn they allow real-time taxation, automatic penalties, spending restrictions, complete economic surveillance, a weapon more efficient than anything before it. For centuries, money was a tool, neutral, simple, and tied to physical value. But over time, it quietly transformed into something far more powerful and far more dangerous. Money became a weapon used not to destroy nations, but to quietly control them. 3 core takeaways. Takeaway number 1. Money detached from physical value becomes a tool of influence rather than a tool of trade. Once gold links were severed, money served those who controlled it, not those who earned it. Takeaway number 2. Debt is not a side effect of modern finance, it is the fuel that keeps the system running. Without constant borrowing, the global economy collapses. Takeaway number 3. Every financial crisis, inflation spike, or currency shift is not random. It is the predictable outcome of weaponized monetary design. The patterns repeat because the system was built to repeat them, as central banks push digital currencies, as nations drown in debt, and as financial power concentrates into smaller hands. One truth becomes clear: money has never been more powerful, or more dangerous. The next transformation may already be happening, but, like all others before it, the world may not notice until it's too late. If you want to understand the deeper mechanics behind global debt, hidden financial systems, and how money quietly shapes world events, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like the video to support the research, and comment below with the next financial mystery you want exposed, because in a world where money is a weapon, knowledge is the only defense left.